Welcome to the Ordinary Marathoner podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Ordinary Marathoner podcast. My name is Coach Scott. I'll be your host today. It is Sunday today. It is November 17th. And we have a great guest for you today. I'm going to bring her on in just a minute. As always, you can find this and the back episodes of our podcast at our website, ordinarymarathoner.com. You can also check them out on the aggregators, places like Stitcher, TuneIn, iTunes. I believe we are on Google Podcasts now. It's been a little bit of a headache, but been trying to iron that out. I know in the U.S., it seems like people are getting it, but in Canada, it's kind of like some people are, some people aren't. I don't know. It's kind of strange. But you can always go to the website, ordinarymarathoner.com, and check out our new episodes there. You can also check out our YouTube channel, Ordinary Marathoner. Got a lot of videos up there. It's the podcast and also some other things that we've put together. We could really use the subscribers there. So if you're over on our YouTube channel, do me a favor, hit that little red subscribe button over on that page. A lot going on with Team Ordinary. It's our community, our group. It's a wonderful thing. TeamOrdinary.com. You can check that out. A lot of people out there racing, running races, sharing their profiles with us, wearing their Team Ordinary gear, taking pictures, getting involved. It's a great community, and really it's kind of spearheaded over at our Facebook discussion group, which you can find over on Facebook, called Ordinary Marathoners, plural. It's a closed group, so you got to add yourself to it, but we put you right through. We'll accept you right away, and you can either sit there and hang out, introduce yourself. I tell you, I love seeing new people come over there and introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about yourself, and or you can just sit there and lurk. I do that plenty of other groups myself, as I sit there and I lurk, and I kind of just be entertained by other people's content, and we're more than happy to have you in either capacity. Anything else we got going on? You can find me at Twitter at OrdMarathoner. That's O-R-D Marathoner. You follow me there, I'll follow you back. And without any further delay, let's bring in our guest today, our Team Ordinary official dietitian, who I have anointed official team dietitian in the past month or so. She helped me out. I can't even tell you how much she helped me out with my nutrition and diet as I prepped for Ironman Lake Placid. It was really great to have her as a resource. She's a registered dietitian. She works with athletes, and she's here with us today. Allison Knott, welcome to the program, Allison.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be on.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you. I mean, we've had discussions in the past, but I know we've talked about doing the podcast probably for, like a year, I would say, don't you think?
I know, I do. I think this has been a long time coming.
Yeah, we just kind of go back and forth. We keep putting it off, but it's really great to have you here. And you know, it's great to have an expert, someone who knows what they're talking about when it comes to diet. I think it's a topic that a lot of people struggle with in this sport or you know, in athleticism in general, I think, and it's good to talk to somebody who knows what they're doing.
Yeah, it's definitely I think there's a lot of confusion out there about what people should be doing, should be eating and focusing on. So I'm excited to be here, hopefully help to dispel some of that confusion and some of the myths.
Yeah, that's great. I think right off the bat, I think one of the things I wanted to say is, you know, as an athlete and as someone who hasn't really, who kind of started from scratch maybe 4 or 5 years ago, you're kind of approached with a lot of different people who claim to be experts, who know what they're talking about. And, you know, when I looked at it, I was always hearing about the word nutritionist and people would always say, oh, you know, you ever talk to a nutritionist, or I talked to a nutritionist. And then my friend Katie, who introduced me to you, she became a registered dietitian. And I know she went through a lot of schooling in order to get her that sort of label, that distinction, let's say. So, and maybe you can just confirm this. I don't know. I don't need you to necessarily go into detail, but it seems to me like a registered dietitian is sort of a distinction that comes with a lot of schooling, a lot of background knowledge, and not necessarily that nutritionists can be, you know, that won't know exactly what you're talking about, but they might have a different slant, or it's sort of a little bit more liberal in terms of the rules of who can call themselves nutritionists versus a dietitian. Dietitian comes with the distinction of educational background and know-how that I think that's the difference. That's kind of what I learned. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think with the term registered dietitian, you are definitely guaranteed a certain level of education, whereas nutritionist, there isn't any requirement for how much education that person has to go through. So it could be as short as a weekend class, or, all the way up to someone who has a PhD in nutrition could call themselves a nutritionist as well. So clearly there's a difference in that education level.
Right.
So with the registered dietitian, you do have to go through a certain level of education. And even beyond that, there are dietitians who have master's degrees or PhDs even further to really help with solidifying that nutrition education. There's also continuing education requirements associated with being a registered dietitian. So it helps to make sure that you are up to date on the latest nutrition research because it's ever evolving. So it's very important to keep up with that too.
Yeah. I mean, we all know, it is ever evolving. It seems like, that's that whole thing. Eggs are good for you. Eggs are bad for you. Eggs are good for you. Eggs are, you just never know. You can never figure it out. But, and again, it's not to say that there are no good nutritionists out there. It's just to say that, there's a certain distinction level that comes with the title dietitian as opposed to nutritionist. When we decided to do this podcast, me and you had a couple discussions, and I think recently we talked about that article in the New York Times about Mary Cain from Nike, and we had a little bit of discussion. I think that's probably not diet related, but in particular, I think the thing that struck me, and I think the thing that pertains to us, and I wanted to kind of start this conversation at a super broad level, because I just feel like that's where my listeners will appreciate it. I always look at weight loss from, I need to lose weight. I'm overweight. I got to lose weight. And, if you look at all the statistics for my height, like the BMI, and we can talk about that another time, I guess. But, I always, my goal is obviously always to lose weight. And in reading the Mary Cain article, the one thing that struck me was just how, she was already pretty, she didn't weigh that much to begin with. She was like down in the 120s and they were pushing her to lose more and more weight. And I can't help but wonder, like, when it comes for an athlete, and especially for a new athlete, in terms of nutrition and diet and goals and where to be for my optimal performance, how do you figure out what your goal weight should be? How does one go? How would you recommend someone even think about that? It seems like such an overwhelming. Where is my optimal weight? I don't know. Is that a good place to start?
Yeah, I think it's a great place to start. There are calculations that are based in science. However, a lot of them tend to be geared more towards the population health level and not individuals. So things like BMI is something that's used for population health measurement and sometimes can be a challenge when applying to an individual. But these calculations, and then there's an ideal body weight calculation, they can all be a good potential starting point for you. However, I have to always frame that with the recognition that your health and your performance, it's more than a number on a scale, right? So in the case of something like Mary Cain, which is a very extreme example, you can be at a much lower weight and have that be an unhealthy weight and have very detrimental effects, not only on health, but also performance. And then you can go to the opposite extreme of that. And there's no question that the science shows that at a certain extreme point on either end of the scale, you can have negative health impacts. And there are consequences associated with those extremes. So if you need to lose weight, then there could be a potential that could be beneficial for you. But I always encourage that you look at your performance and how you feel and your weight in a way that is framed in what is sustainable, what helps you feel your best, are you performing at your best, and how is your life impacted by trying to maintain that weight? So we're not professional athletes, probably, most of us listening to this. And I think that we, sometimes need to take a look at this through that understanding of there's more to our lives than trying to reach a number on a scale, and health can be so much beyond that number.
Right. I totally agree with that. And, it's kind of like, I think I personally definitely put probably too much attention on that number as I should, but I do always feel like I'm way above what I need to be. And so it's always like, all right, for me, it's always like that battle of exercise and diet to try to lose weight. And really, I get criticized sometimes because of that stance, because I'm always kind of like, I need to lose weight. I need to lose weight. And there's certainly a big crowd of people that, not that they're, they understand the health effects of obesity, but it's like, you also want to love who you are. And I think I get that. I just, for performance reasons, I always feel like I'll be faster if I lose weight. And it's always kind of like hanging over my head for me. It's a thing, just as a thing. But, I like the way you kind of put that. And I do think, the scale isn't the be all end all. There's certainly more to life than a number. And you mentioned like personal happiness, and you can't let it affect your life, right? I mean, that's kind of like.
Yeah, I think there's a balancing act to this, and it is, everybody's different, and we all have to come at this with our individual approach and know that we're all going to face different challenges, and we have a different number that might be the healthiest number for us. But I think, you have to be very honest with yourself and be careful not to cross into that boundary of this desire to be a healthier, or what you perceive as being a healthier weight, let's say, becomes an obsession or has a negative consequence on not only your performance, but also just your mental health. It is a fine line. And that's where I think having a dietitian or having somebody that you can talk with to really help you frame this in a way that is more realistic and doable and is a healthier process can be very beneficial for you.
Yeah. And I love like just having someone there, and it makes me wonder actually, which is kind of a little off topic, but how much of your training actually becomes talking to people in their individual circumstances versus the hard science of how much you have to eat. Well, let's actually start there, because I think we talked about this before, and I wanted to lay out again, I wanted to start at a broad level. I don't really want to get too into detail, but once you kind of realize, all right, I want to start getting into a mode of losing weight for athletic purposes or whatnot, then it becomes, how do I mix diet with exercise? And in particular, start at the broadest level. Like, how do you decide, like say, all right, I'm going to start losing weight. I want to start a program. I'm on my MyFitnessPal, and I'm counting calories and trying to make sure that I don't, eat over what kind of diet in terms of general, like how much do I eat in a day? Like, I think that's kind of like the broadest question I can put it. How much should I eat in a day? Like, what is that? How does that start? When I start a diet plan, how do I start that?
Yeah, I think that, there's a couple of different ways that you can approach this. In general, a lot of you ask the question about how much of what I do is about how you're actually applying it into your daily life versus the hard science. And I'd say that it's very much on the application piece, much heavier in that realm. The hard science is very important, of course, but we all kind of know the basics of that hard science. So why is it that we still aren't necessarily meeting the recommendations that are put forth by that science, and what it tells us is beneficial for our health is a whole nother piece of this big puzzle that makes the dietitian role so important, because we can help with you applying that into your daily life. But I think when it comes to understanding what you should be eating, everybody has different energy needs. So you can't exactly provide a blanket recommendation. Of course, there's the general recommendation for eating, most of our guidelines are based off of 2,000 calories a day, because that's what's going to be appropriate for the majority of the population. But when you start looking at differences in individuals, and then you add on top of that this additional layer of having this endurance athlete sort of role, and you're really pushing your body to a different extreme, then your energy needs are going to change. And so one of the most basic ways that you can start with this is just doing a simple Google search of the Harvard Healthy Eating Plate or the Olympics Committee athlete plates. If you Google either of those, it's essentially going to give you a plate, and it's going to split that plate into different sections of food groups. So the athlete plates are really great because they actually break it down into 3 different plates, and it talks about your lower level training days, or those light intensity days, moderate intensity, and then high intensity. Gives you a general overview of how your macronutrients in your food group should change depending on your intensity level. And so it's not really just about calories at that point, but it's more about this distribution of your food groups and the nutrients that you're taking in, and how you can adjust them based off of your activity level. So I think starting there is a very good place to start. Of course, there are MyFitnessPal or Lose It or some of these other tracking apps. And I think that those can be a useful tool in that they help you understand where certain nutrients are coming from and how many grams of protein are actually in that yogurt that you're eating or whatever you might be consuming. So it's a good educational tool, but sometimes the calorie ranges can be pretty, I would say, almost too low in some cases. So you need to be careful to recognize that number that's coming out from some of those apps might or might not directly apply to your situation. So we have to come back to the recognition that we have we need to be able to trust ourselves too. And if we're hungry, even if your app says that you are going over, you should eat, Yeah. So I think we need to really still allow that flexibility and know that it's that number that's coming out from those apps really shouldn't be the end all be all of your diet plan. Yeah.
Which is interesting. If I eat every time I'm hungry, I'll just never stop eating. I'll just keep going. I'll never get my exercise in because I'll just be eating all the time.
I would argue that that's probably not the case.
I know we can talk.
We should test that theory. I
have a question relating to that, but it's down on the list here. And the funny thing is, I always try to just have conversations with people on the podcast. But for you, for whatever reason, I'm like, I want to make sure I have my questions written down so I could ask you everything I need to know because I want to make sure that I learn as much as I can from this. So let me ask you this now. In general, so I've been on diets where. Typically growing up, it was always 3 square meals a day, right? Breakfast, lunch, dinner. That's kind of like the traditional, what everyone did as a kid growing up. And then I've been on diets, like diet plans. Some of them actually engineered by dietitians, actually. You'd be proud of me. But they recommend more like 5 to 6 meals per day. Just typically it may be a little bit smaller meals, but, more like five or 6 meals a day. So I'm wondering, in any typical diet plan, is that something major to consider how often you eat per day? And is there a number? Is there a number of times per day that we should be eating?
That's a really good question. And I think the answer that I'm going to give you is always the one that seems to be the answer from most nutrition questions. And it depends.
Right.
And the reason I say it depends is because some people do really well with multiple small meals throughout the day. Some people would be better off eating those 3 square meals, as they maybe once were called. And some people even eat less than that. I think that the most important thing is to, number one, make sure that you're eating enough nutrients. So as you start to cut way back on your eating occasions, then the potential for missing out on nutrients increases because you're eliminating opportunity to eat nutrients essentially. So I like to look at diets as being this additional sort of, you are giving your body more. So I like to put a positive spin on it. I don't like to focus on what we're taking out of our diets. I like to think about what we're putting in and how it's actually going to impact our health. And so it really does, that should be the primary thing is, okay, am I getting enough nutrients with the way that I'm eating? And then the second thing is that when it comes to, again, being an athlete, you do have to look at the timing of meals and how the timing is influencing your performance. So if you are not eating before you work out and you're realizing that those training sessions are not as intense as you need them to be, or maybe you don't feel as good as you think you should be feeling, it could have something to do with the timing of your meals. And so looking at that might mean that you need to add an additional snack or an additional meal at a different time, which could influence how many times you're eating throughout the day.
Right. And
So,
actually, that was actually my next question. Was sort of like, what kind of strategy? I mean, all right, I think you almost answered it when you said sort of like, you have to sort of analyze what you eat before workouts and how that affects performance. But in general, it's sort of like scheduling and planning meals around your workout. Now, I'm specifically speaking. I remember you telling me that after my workout, within the next 30 minutes, that I should have like 20 grams of protein in the next 30 minutes. I think it was 30 minutes to an hour or something like that. But in general, even broader than that, what is there a specific sort of guideline around scheduling, even during, I guess probably during events is a totally different topic than before and after. But say I'm going to go out for like a 10-mile run tomorrow, and say that's, on the strong end for me. That's a really good workout. How should I be preparing for that? How should I, plan my meals around that? Is there a structure?
yeah, definitely. And I like to break it down into not only the timing of when you'll eat, but also the timing as in the length of the workout. So it's essentially time times 2. Right? So you think, okay, the time of when you'll eat, which is how far out of the workout are you? So if you're 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, it's really going to impact the amount and the type of food that you're consuming, and maybe even the ratios of specific. I'm thinking more about macronutrients. But if you are also looking at the length of the workout, then that's going to influence how much you're consuming and if you're actually eating before this workout or not. So I use the example of if I'm going into a 45-minute spin class and I had lunch 3 hours before, then I probably don't need to eat right before that workout unless I'm extremely hungry at that point. And the reason I say extremely hungry is because there is research that shows that if you are eating even as little as 25 to 30 grams of carbohydrate in that hour before a workout, it can really influence your performance and perceived effort. So you could actually potentially work out harder, even for longer, if you get some of those carbs in right before. But then if you take that same scenario, and let's say I ate 3 hours before my workout, but I'm going to go out for a 3-hour bike ride. Clearly, the nutrition plan needs to change because the workout plan is changing. So it will become much more important to ensure that the meal that I ate 3 hours before needs to have an adequate amount of carbohydrates to carry me into that training session. And then I also need to be thinking about what I'm consuming during that training session. So, if you think about those two things combined, it's not only just the timing of when you'll eat, but also the length of the workout, then that can really help you frame how you're going to approach your nutrition plan. And some people do very well, let's say with early morning workouts, having not had anything since dinner the night before. Other people find that it is severely impactful on their exercise. I know that from a personal standpoint, if I'm hungry, that's all I'm thinking about. Yeah, I'm not thinking about the workout. I'm not thinking about anything else. So you really need to think about it yourself and how you're performing on an empty stomach. And, there really isn't a lot of science that shows that it's necessarily beneficial to exercise on an empty stomach. So you need to take this as an approach that is going to be beneficial for you. One good rule of thumb, I would say, just to kind of tie into that with carbohydrates specifically, is you think about 1 to 4. So if you're 1 hour out, it's 1 gram of carb per kilogram of body weight. If you're 2 hours out, it's 2 grams of carbs per kilogram of body weight. So 3 hours out, it's 3 grams. But it's not that you're eating all of those, 4 hours before. It's just you kind of can take the assumption of how many hours out am I, and then how can I adjust my carbohydrate intake to accompany that.
Yeah. And, it's funny because you start mentioning those calculations and people are probably like trying to write some of this stuff down and try to figure it out for themselves. But I think that comment actually, it gives a good opportunity for us to sort of say exactly what it is that you do. And I think as a dietitian in working with you personally, it was always kind of like you're always like tweaking the machine, right? You're always and like you mentioned, some people work well waking up waking up in the morning and getting right on the bike and doing a routine or something like that. And some people are like, oh, I can't move, I need something to eat, and then can work out. But there's like a lot of individualistic things that come with diet and how it affects performance. I know for me, we started out with that calculation. And I remember thinking that, I mean, my body weight's probably higher than average endurance athlete. And so that calculation became a huge amount of calories in the morning for me to eat. And I remember I just tried to like chow down a whole lot of calories before my first long workout. And that long workout became a very short workout because I didn't approach it the right way. And then what we had to do was kind of like tweak it down and make little adjustments to make it fit me personally, on a better, just fit my body and how my body reacts to certain things. And just in testing it and going through different iterations of what I should eat and all that stuff, it kind of led me towards a more optimal, I guess, nutrition plan for before a long workout or a race. And that's kind of like, I mean, that's really goes to, I think, the crux of what you do. Is that right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it has to be personalized. So yeah, I can throw out a bunch of numbers on a podcast and sound very scientific, but just as you said, it's not going to be beneficial for you if it doesn't work, right? So you have to figure out, how am I adjusting this so that it makes sense for me and what I need? And it does come down to everything from not only the timing, but also digestion and how your body reacts to certain foods. And then also the length and intensity of your workout and building up to a place that, kind of practicing that training plan. I mean, just like you're practicing and training for a race, you should be doing the same thing with nutrition as well. So it's key to have the understanding that these numbers and calculations might all sound really great. And in an ideal scenario, you'd be able to plug them right in and you're just going to be able to run with it. But sometimes that's not always the case. And arguably, oftentimes that's not always the case. It's kind of like any kind of training plan. I mean, how many times have you gone off of a training plan because of whatever reason? I think about personally, it happens all the time. So you make adjustments and you do so accordingly so that you can actually be successful and still reach your end goal. And the same should be the case for nutrition.
Yeah. And I think, as a coach myself, one of the things I always tell my athletes is that every long run that you have, every weekend, every long run that you go on is an opportunity. Sometimes I think people are like, oh, I got to do my long run today. And they roll out of bed and they just kind of go after it and they just try to finish their miles, and they might do it and it might be great. But I think so much of this has to do with nutrition and diet that every long run is an opportunity to kind of explore, to test, to, to just kind of, I don't know, take it into the lab, I guess. And just, this is a practical here, to analyze what your diet is and what what works best for you. And some days, it might not work and you might have a crappy run and you might get home and be like, oh, I should have never did that. I should never eaten that. But you know what? You learned, right? You learned what, so it's a personal, and I think that's kind of where, the dietitian really can help, because as a coach, I really am not supposed to be giving specific dietary, information as outside of, in race, during workout. I can work with athletes to kind of pinpoint their nutrition needs, but I can't really give them a diet plan. I can't really tell them the extent of knowledge that a registered dietitian might have. And I think that for me, you did an excellent job kind of like narrowing stuff down, and helping me out and helping me reach that sort of optimal nutrition diet sort of balance.
Yeah. And I think that what's so key to remember on this is that we have these races and we have these training plans, but the things that we're eating around that and during those times is maybe 20 or 30% of our entire diet, right? So we have to also look at the other things that we're eating and how those things are going to be impacting our long-term health. So we're only that athlete, right, for a small percentage of time. But we have all of these other components of our lives and these other pieces to this bigger puzzle that are going to have a long-term impact on our health. And so it's important to really look at not only what you're eating before and after and during these intense exercise sessions, but also everything else, because arguably the majority of the other foods are the things that are what you're eating the majority of the time. So it's going to have a positive or potentially not so positive effect on your long-term health and potentially your performance. Yep. So I think having an understanding of what you're doing during those exercise bouts and the intense training sessions is very key, but so are the other pieces that sometimes we forget about.
Right, good point.
Yeah, and I sometimes will see a lot of emphasis on specific performance, whether it's supplements or plans or something that really is very targeted for a specific amount of time. And then the rest of the conversation is kind of forgotten about all of the other things that you're consuming. So you can't just, it's kind of like putting a Band-Aid on something. You can't really look at it that way. We have to figure out, well, does this fit in? And how is the rest of my diet also supporting my goals? So it might not be this immediate, it might not be this immediate impact like you would get with like a certain supplement, but you could also be influencing your performance in a much more positive way if you had a good foundation. So I think that's tying it back to kind of how I and other dietitians in the sports nutrition world can help. It is putting all of that together and really having you create a way of eating that fits into your lifestyle, but also helps you reach those performance goals.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point and a great point you make. In terms of the post-workout and the 20 grams of protein, you also used to tell me to eat carbs. I remember I was scared of carbs because everyone's like, oh, if you eat carbs, you're going to get fat. And I'm like, all right, I'll try to eat less carbs. And then you were like, why are you scared of carbs? Can you... I remember you telling me specifically that post-workout, 20 grams of protein and also I should be eating carbs as well. Can you give me, is there any kind of not necessarily a guideline, but sort of a reason as to why that's important?
Yeah. So, the timing of a post-workout meal might not be as restrictive as we often think it is. So, first, it's specifically when it comes to protein, eating protein consistently throughout the day. So what I mean by that is you don't want to eat all your protein at dinner and have no protein at breakfast. You can have this kind of consistent intake throughout the day is important whenever you're eating meals. But also post-workout, if you have no plans to eat within the next 2 or 3 hours after a hard workout, then you should probably eat. You need to make sure that there's some kind of consumption of protein and carb combination within that 1, 2, 3 hour time frame. And the amount that you consume is really dependent on how far out from the workout you're eating. But that 20 to 25 grams of protein is kind of that magic number of muscle protein synthesis. So if you combine it with carbohydrates, then you're ensuring that the amino acids from the protein are actually being used in the way that they should be used to help with the muscle repair. And the carbohydrates are providing an additional energy source. So, it is important to get a good combination of the two. And sometimes people think, oh my gosh, 20 grams of protein, that seems like a lot. But you think something like a Greek yogurt, just a standard container of Greek yogurt, I know we talked about this, is, it depends on the Greek yogurt, but somewhere between 16 and 19 grams of protein. So,
that's great. Yeah.
And it's easy to consume that. So I think, but if you're going to eat dinner, let's say you are an evening workout person and you're going to eat dinner within 2-ish or 3-ish hours after the gym session, then you're probably getting enough protein and the timing of it's going to be okay. But just really focusing on that combination with the carbs is key, just to make sure that the amino acids and the proteins used accurately.
Right. I remember, I guess, two things. One thing is you always go into the health stores and you see these protein bars that are 35 grams of protein. Is that necessarily necessary? I mean, it seems like a lot.
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing about bars is that They are convenient. So
Right.
you can, keep them in your bag and have them forever and use them, in an emergency situation, let's say, if you're super hungry. But what I also find about bars is sometimes they can be filled with a lot of other ingredients that maybe are not necessary. And they can also be kind of expensive, and maybe that's not sustainable. I would much rather somebody choose like a whole food source of whatever the nutrient is they're looking for. So macronutrients, you think about carbohydrates, fat, and protein. And if you're looking for protein, then what foods naturally contain protein? It doesn't really necessarily need to be a manufactured, engineered food. So there's benefits to those things because of the convenience factor. And some of them are, you think about something like, let's say, Gatorade or Powerade or all of these sports drinks. There's a very specific reason why those have the calories and the carbohydrates and the electrolytes in them in the balance they do. It's all because of that is what is necessary for sport. So it makes sense that those engineered foods exist. But sometimes with some of these other supplements and bars, you can really get into a realm of there's some just unnecessary things and ingredients that maybe just aren't going to be as positive for your health as it would be if you choose a food that naturally contains those macronutrients that you're looking for, but also has all of the other beneficial compounds. Like you think about plants, phytochemicals, antioxidants, vitamins, minerals, things that are just naturally found in plants that we learn more and more about every day. And so we continually show that those whole food sources are much more beneficial for our health than when we extract nutrients and take them individually and put them into supplements and then consume them that way. And it probably has a lot to do with like synergistic effects of how nutrients are actually interacting with each other and how they're interacting in the body. But I also like to just go back to the practicality of it. I mean, these things are typically less expensive and sometimes they taste better. I mean, it might be, hard to compete with like a birthday cake flavored protein bar. But, I do think that there is a beneficial effect. So we
You
can
just made me real hungry.
there.
I'm like, oh, birthday cake.
Yeah. I think we just have to, you have to find a balance.
Yeah.
And there's a huge range of variability in the ingredients and what is found in different types of bars. And so some of them are almost borderline supplements, with the amount of additional vitamins and minerals that are being added
they
into
just
them.
Jam stuff in there, right? It's crazy.
So,
it's funny. Like I'm sitting here and I'm all proud of like the one thing I created. I hate to say created, it's kind of easy, but so I would take this little like organic oatmeal cup that you just pour, like I would actually pour almond milk in it, and then I would take this like plant-based protein powder and pour that like a little, a tablespoon of that in there. And then I'd mix it together. And I remember just being like, Allison, look what I got. It's like 20 grams of protein. It tastes really good. And I was really proud of myself. But now I'm like, maybe the protein powder isn't as, is protein powder another thing, sort of like the bars, like you kind of have to look out for?
Yeah, I just think you need to look at the ingredients and also understand that, unfortunately, supplements aren't regulated. A lot of times people are surprised to hear that. But supplements are something that kind of can go rogue, and it can maybe have something in it that you didn't know was in it, or it wasn't listed on the label, or maybe the quality isn't exactly what you're looking for. So that's why it's important to really look at some of there's seals and different certifications that can be present on the actual supplement bottle. And you can really look into, is this third party tested and is it actually what it says it is?
Yeah.
So, but no, I mean, I don't want to say a blanket statement of you should not be consuming these things. Right. But I think that it's important to be an advocate for yourself and be an educated consumer and know that just because it's on the shelf at your health food store does not necessarily mean that it's going to have the most positive effect. Yeah.
Well, the interesting thing, as off topic a little bit, but as a football fan, you always see these guys getting nabbed for like using things that they shouldn't be using, substance abuse policy or whatnot, and a lot of them they always go to it's the go-to, right? It's or something in the supplement that I didn't know that it was banned and I didn't know, and I always kind of like laugh and say, yeah, right, you're probably you're doing steroids and we all know it, and but maybe there is something to that, because they every once in a while they like you said, it's not regulated. You don't know necessarily, you might not know what's in there. Maybe all these football players that I thought were liars aren't lying after all.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely something to be said for the fact that there are a lot of supplements that are not what they say they are, and they can be contaminated.
Yeah.
There's actually the Federal Trade Commission has a website that I don't have off the top of my head, but maybe we could put it in a link somehow into this that
Sure.
gives some more detail on some of the ingredients that they have found in some supplements that are not good for you. And so it actually breaks it down in these are the supplements that contain these ingredients. And again, it's not all supplements. There's a lot of really great things out there that could be beneficial, but you just need to be aware that it's not a well-regulated world. The supplement world can be kind of like the Wild West. So it is important to take a look at what you're consuming. Ask yourself the critical questions. Why are you consuming it? Is there science to support what this bottle says? And is this something that I could potentially be getting the same benefit from by eating actual whole foods versus the supplement? And is that convenient for me? And would it be advantageous if I were to look in that direction versus the supplement? You don't want to use that supplement again as like a Band-Aid to a diet that maybe needs to be a little bit more balanced.
Right. And, and that being said, I think that kind of segues into another topic that we wanted to sort of cover here, which is, how, I think a lot of us, you mentioned this, like using a supplement as a Band-Aid when there are other options out there that may be healthier, more natural. I think a lot of people just, they don't know how, they go into a grocery store and they don't have a plan. They don't know what they're going to make. They don't, and it's so easy to just grab boxes off the shelves of pre-made stuff as opposed to going, hanging out in the produce section and finding the right stuff. When you go into a grocery store as a dietitian, someone who knows what they should be eating, how do you approach that experience? Let's, I guess, approach it that way. How does a dietitian go grocery shopping?
That is such a good question. And
I know that wasn't on my list, so I don't know if you were prepared.
No, I mean, I probably spend more time in the grocery store than the average person. I love the grocery store, as ridiculous as that sounds. So I like to really focus on getting the components and the things of how my actual eating pattern needs to look. So let's say that, and I talk about eating patterns a lot, and eating patterns are something that sometimes can be confusing, but essentially it's the totality of the foods that you're consuming. So if you know that you need to be eating the majority of your diet should be vegetables and fruits, and that you need to have some whole grains, that you need to have whatever your sources of protein are, I like to think about it in those ratios, kind of like going back to the plate. So right. The way that I approach grocery shopping.
You love the plate.
I do, because it's such a good visual.
We're going to put up the plate on the video. That's what I got to do on the video. I got to put up a little picture of the plate.
It's like almost comically basic that right. It's just, it's so, people think, why are you so obsessed with this? But it's because it is such a good visual, and it is so basic, and it's really easy it's applicable, for people. So then I try to take that and think about that in a way when I'm grocery shopping, so that the majority of what I'm purchasing, I spend a lot of time in the produce section, because I like to look for seasonality, and I want to see what, looks the best. And so I get a lot of different types of vegetables, and oftentimes I don't even know what I'm going to do with them. I just know that I need to get them, and I'm going to somehow figure out how I'm going to work them into whatever the meal is. So vegetables and fruits are always key, and they're always going to be the first thing to make it into my cart. And then from there, I typically go into things like the pantry staples. So I'm thinking about different types of whole grains that are shelf stable, like whether it's quick cooking rice, or it's a spaghetti or, a whole wheat, some type of whole grain, and something that is easy. And again, it's like, I don't even really know what I'm going to do with it sometimes, but I just know that I need to have those things available. So this is kind of my approach, and I figure it out as I go along. And then I'm looking at things like the beans and legumes, typically in the canned section. I also like to pick up a lot of frozen produce as well, because I think, it's great to have, and you can always use it as a backfall or fallback if you need some sort of produce and you don't have something available. And then I tend to lean very heavily on the vegetarian side. So not necessary for everyone, but I will get a lot of the different vegetarian meat alternatives like tofu and tempeh and that sort of thing. But of course, the proteins, whether it's you're getting beef or chicken or fish, having that as well. And then I use that same approach to build a meal. So always looking for getting some sort of vegetable and the whole grain, and then the protein combo, and then including some fat in there, whether it's from nuts and seeds or an avocado or something like that, or you're just cooking with an oil, plant-based oil. But then it's just, I kind of build these meals that are all around that general guideline. So
I think that could probably be a podcast in and of itself.
Yeah. And I think that it is about becoming comfortable with knowing that you don't necessarily have to follow an exact recipe. If you have a general theme of maybe you're trying to go for a certain flavor profile, or if you know that you're building a pasta, or if you're looking at a rice-based bowl or something like that, then you can kind of build on it from there. And that a lot of vegetables and grains are interchangeable and proteins are interchangeable. So you might find a recipe that sounds really great, but maybe you don't have the exact produce list that it's looking for. If you have other pieces of produce, most likely you can substitute them. And it's becoming really comfortable, I think, with that sort of ability to change your list and your approach is key, because then you utilize what you have available to you while also still building healthy meals. And one thing that came up on the recent Facebook conversation about nutrition was this pantry list. Right. So that's something that I am creating, that I want, to be put out there for people so that they can use it as a resource.
Yeah. I think we talked about you doing a guest blog for the TeamOrdinary page, and maybe we can work that into there somehow at some point.
Yeah. And I would love that. And I think, we also talked a little bit about how this pressure to meal prep, and I would love to touch on that as well with that blog post, and talking about, you don't have to prep this rainbow of beautiful exact meals every single Sunday, that you can have a different approach to it if it works for you.
Yeah.
And like the mini meal preps and that sort of thing.
Right. And I wanted, that's exactly what I was going to sort of bring up is, first thing is, I think that you, for me, you kind of like hit a nail on the head when you talk about having the right sort of combination of food at the house. And then sort of you get into almost like a routine of planning ahead, knowing what you have, making sure that you have things in the house that are good alternatives. And on top of that, you have to have alternatives for, all right, I'm in a rush. I'll tell you, here's a perfect example. I'm in a rush this morning. Steph and I stayed up late last night. We watched a movie. We had a bottle of wine, and then we woke up this morning when the baby's crying. And I'm like, oh, I got the podcast. I got to run out. I went to Dunkin' Donuts, got a coffee, and you're gonna scold me, but I got a
no scolding.
A multigrain. At least it was a multigrain bagel with cream cheese for breakfast, which is sort of like my go-to. I have no time. I got to get something, but I need to have better alternatives for that. And you know what? Truth be told, you could probably do better even at Dunkin' Donuts. You could probably order. They have other options that are sometimes better. But for today, it was just like. But if I'm in the right frame of mind, if I have the right, if I'm prepared mentally in the proper fashion, I can make better choices. It's just sometimes I don't.
Yeah, and I think that this idea of breaking down whatever the barriers are that you're facing on a regular basis is really important. So if you recognize that not having the right foods available is a key part of why maybe you are shifting towards something else that you don't think is as good for you, then okay, we need to have the right foods available. But then it's also, what are you doing with those foods? And, for some people, it's even further than that, and like having maybe even things that are more on the line of where they feel almost out of control around certain foods, and they always have those available. And that can be a challenge too. That's kind of the opposite side of this spectrum. But it is recognizing what those challenges are and realizing that if you can set yourself up to reach your goals easier, it's just this whole phrase of making the healthy choice the easy choice is really key, because you don't have those constant barriers that you're having to break through every single time you're trying to make a decision. Right. So the resistance piece goes away.
Yeah. And it's so fun. It's like, I'm going to kind of end on this here because I know we kind of have a hard stop, but I feel like, we talked for almost an hour here about food prep. Well, not even food prep, but eating the right things and making all those making the right choices and all that. And then you have, I think for a lot of us, and a lot of the answers to the question that in the discussion group was, what's your biggest eating challenge? And it's like pizza, chocolate, all that stuff. And it's like, we know what's good and what's bad, yet we make the poor decision time and time again. And how much of your job is knowing all these factors, yet having to deal with nut jobs like me who can't stop ordering the cream cheese on the bagel. It's like the psychological binge and the Halloween candy. My God, I went to town on the Halloween candy. It's like, how much, it's like, it's gotta be like a 50-50 strike there with trying to just educate people and then trying to deal with our mental, our psychiatric problems.
I think that there is just this idea that, we just need to educate, and people are just going to start making different decisions. And that's just not the case, because I'm sure that whoever's listening to this right now knows exactly what they need to be doing. Maybe there's some tweaks and some details that they would appreciate having a dietitian weigh in on. But for the most part, it is more about exactly what you're talking about. And my approach tends to be, no food really is off limits for me. I don't agree with having a single diet that is right for everyone. And I think that some of the foods that we traditionally think of as bad, I don't really like to put any labels like that on those foods. And I really like to focus more on the positive of what the foods are actually providing for you. I mean, you say cream cheese and you think bad, and I hear cream cheese and I'm like, oh, that sounds delicious. And also it's a good source of fat. And you got a whole, you got a multigrain bagel. It might not be whole grain, but it probably has more fiber than, let's say a donut, and you added some fat to it. It's going to fill you up. It's going to keep you full longer. That's kind of the approach that I
see what she's doing. She's trying to make me feel better.
Yeah. But I mean, this is kind of the thing that is so key with how you think about your personal nutrition and the reality that you face. And some of these foods that we put into this category of being bad, quote unquote, are then the only foods that we think about. So how do we include those in our diets in a way that we don't really feel guilty about, that we eat and we enjoy? I mean, we're humans. We should be eating and enjoying foods that we love to eat. And then we also should be able to do that in a way that we still can reach our goals, whatever those goals might be. So there's things that you can do that can help to minimize your quote unquote temptations or your feeling like you have a lack of willpower. And I think a lot of that is where this conversation, in my individual working with people comes into play, because then you start saying, okay, well, what are the major things that you struggle with? And let's look at other pieces of your diet and your lifestyle. Number one, are you eating enough? Are you getting adequate sleep? I mean, we know that sleep has a significant impact on everything from like the hormones that influence hunger to our actual decision-making process. So if your sleep is suffering, that could be a huge reason why you maybe are experiencing some of these extreme cravings or temptations or things that you feel like you don't have any control over. It might not be the only thing that could be the problem, but it's a piece of the puzzle. And then also looking at, well, what are your limits? Do you have a spouse who brings home an entire box of cookies every day? Is that an issue?
I'm sure that is for a lot of people. I'm sure things like that.
Yeah. I mean, do you work in an office where there are donuts in the break room every single day, or your cubicle neighbor has a container of candy on their desk and you walk by and you eat that candy every single day? That's the kind of stuff that you can look at and figure out, all right, I know that this is a part of my lifestyle and my situation. So how am I addressing this? Is it actually a problem? Do I need to create a little speed bump or a barrier in my mind that helps me acknowledge, is this a mindless thing that I'm doing where I just kind of zombie walk to the break room because I'm really actually sick of what I'm looking at on my computer screen? It's just, in those things you can't address. You can't address that.
I feel like you're using all of my personal stories here.
No,
I know. It happens with everybody.
I mean, it really is something that you would be. It is not. It's not unique to you. Although I do remember having this conversation now. Yeah, but you probably aren't dealing with that now, right?
I'm not. Correct.
Yeah. So I think it is. That's where having a dietitian can be so helpful, because it does take all of this information we already know and it personalizes it, and it gives you the opportunity to develop skills, and it helps you learn tools that can really be a key part of your success. So that's my goal as a dietitian, is really just to kind of empower somebody to use that knowledge they already have.
And I think, and I think you do a great job. And I think that, the one thing now that I'm remembering some of our old conversations, I talk a lot, and we get on the phone and we chat for an hour, and it's some of the things you say, for some reason, this is just the way I am. It's I got a lot to say, and I don't always listen to everything that people say to me, and which is great for a podcast host. But I know every time we talked, there was at least one or two takeaways that I just wouldn't forget, that would always kind of and you might have, you've probably told me a lot of stuff, and then there'd be one or two things that would just stick in my head. And at that time, it's kind of either what I needed or what the knowledge I was looking for. And yeah, sometimes you have to tell me the same thing over and over again because I forget, or I'm not taking notes. But I feel like you've taught me a lot about just, nutrition as a whole and ways to approach things. And, obviously you're not here to cut my meat for me and tell me exactly how much to eat. That kind of stuff is my responsibility. And, I understand that, but it's I always feel like it's a productive use of my time, to spend time talking to you and asking you questions about diet, when it's such a big part of training. And so much of it goes into your performance and how when you cross the line at the end of the day, that number there's a lot that goes into that number, and diet is certainly a big portion of it. And so I just thank you for all the time you spent with me, teaching me a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, because my approach is to really be practical about this and to make it personalized. And I'm happy that it's helpful.
Yeah.
I think that all of the knowledge that you have on the training side of things is very helpful for me. So I appreciate that too. And the group that you created is just awesome. So it's such a great,
cool.
It's a great resource and support. Yep.
Yeah. Thank you. So I'm going to let you go. I know I've kept you here too late already. It's funny thing was, I'm looking at my list of questions here. I 5 questions that I'm going, this is either going to be the shortest podcast of all time, or it's going to go really well. And I feel like it went really well. We've, I hope we can have you back, at a future date as well. I'll get another list of 5 questions, and we'll see how long it takes us to answer those.
I would love that. It's now that I have experienced my first ever podcast, I'm realizing that maybe it's not as intimidating as I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, I wasn't going to, I try not to put you on the spot or anything like that. But
this is great.
Thank you so much for coming, for coming by, spending time with us. I know that some people had some questions for you that I don't think I was able to get to every single one of them, but we'll have you back, and we'll try to do this again sometime. I think it was really good. I think, people are going to learn a lot from this one.
Yeah, that sounds great. I would love to be back.
And the last thing is, how do we reach you? If someone's out there listening and saying, "Oh, this lady knows what she's talking about," how do I get out and find her? How do you get in touch with Allison Knott?
I am on Facebook. You can search A New Well Nutrition. I'm also on Instagram at A New Well, so it's ANEW.well. And then also on Twitter at Allison Knott RD. And, I have a website, AllisonKnott.com, and another one, anewwell.co. And I also have, of course, email, which is just allison@anewwell.co.
Right. I know that, we've arranged on TeamOrdinary.com a little bit of a discount that you can get through there. So if you go to TeamOrdinary.com and search under Team Deals, our team dietitian, official team dietitian, Allison Knott, you can reach her through there as well as I'll put links on the podcast as well. Just want to make sure that people know how to find you if they're interested.
Yeah, and I'm in the Team Ordinary or in the Ordinary Marathoners group too.
You are.
Yep.
That's right.
Always starting conversations about nutrition.
That was great. That was great. Anyway, all right. So thanks again for coming on the show, Allison. I know you got a long day ahead of you, and I hate to keep you so long, but thank you so much.
No, thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right. And with that, we're going to call it quits for the day. We got a lot going on the next week or two. I'll be back at you on a couple times this next week with our podcast. I'm working on a few more guests to bring into the show next week. In the next couple of weeks, I got a list. Hopefully we'll get to them. I know I've been a little bit deficient on these interviews, but and lining them up, that is. But we'll get back to it. I got a list of guests. We're going to have a good time here. Anyway, with that, always remember, every day is an ordinary day unless you make it extraordinary. So get after it, guys.